If you've just begun to listen here, we just covered a section on 3 ways to keep your kids off dope. We talked about how to build character and responsibility in your children so they can say no to dope. We talked about good discipline coupled with love and why it gives your kids security in your home, and that'll give them a reason to stay off of it. We talked about how to do and how to have good quality time with your children and why that's important, because it brings about communication. That's the only way you're going to get it. This is kind of an extension for those of you who will be viewing by TV and or maybe watching a videotape. And this is for you. And it's kind of an extension on this line. Parents have asked me many, many times, why do kids have to take it? Why do kids have to take dope? Why do they have to smoke pot? Why do they have to pop pills? And I scratched my brain about that for a long time. And I began to ask people. First of all, I began to read. And everything I read said the reason kids smoke pot is because of peer pressure. They can't help it. I raised a good kid. His name's John, and he's 14 years old. He goes down to the junior high down here, and I raised him right. I really did. But he goes down to that junior high school, and he walks through the door, and all these kids jump on him, and they hold him down on the ground, and they say, smoke a joint, smoke a joint, smoke a joint. And because of peer pressure, my kid just can't get out of it. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's pushing my kid to do it, and so that's why he did it. Or I hear people who say, it's because of escape from reality. It's why kids smoke pot and pop pills. And I read several things about this, and several studies and several authors, professional and non-professional alike, on their opinion on why kids smoke pot or pop pills. Everything I found out from kids themselves was contrary to what I read in some of the research. And I'm going to talk to you this morning about that. Why? Why do kids smoke pot? Why do they pop pills? We arrested a kid, 15 years old. I'll call his name Pete. Pete Moss, that's a good name. I went up to see him, and we arrested him for 23 counts of burglary in our police department. 15 years old, little short kid. I asked him the day before the judge sent him off, why do you have to burglarize? 23 burglaries are pretty heavy for a 15-year-old kid. How did it all start? And Pete told me this. Pete told me when he was 9 years old, he began to smoke pot. And after he smoked pot for a couple of years, he began to pop Quaaludes and take pills. Pretty soon he was taking cocaine, mescaline. He told me by the time he was 14, going on 15, in order to smoke, snort, pop, inhale, inject, sniff, swallow, everything that he wanted to consume in a day's time, it would cost him between $100 and $120 a day. They couldn't afford that. So he started shoplifting. Then he started burglarizing houses to get money to buy dope. I said, okay, I can buy that. You're going to burglarize houses to get money to buy dope. But tell me this, why do you have to do it? Marijuana is not a physically addicting drug, and that's most of what you use. If you quit smoking pot right now, you're not going to fall on the floor and go into DTs. You're not going to vomit and have diarrhea and froth at the mouth. That's not going to happen to you if you quit marijuana right now. But yet you have to do it on a regular basis, on a daily basis. And according to the Federal Drug Report 2 years ago, 9.6% of all 12th grade kids in this country smoke pot every day. And I asked Pete, why do you have to do it? Why do you have to do it? And Pete gave me an answer that I've heard over and over and over and over, hundreds upon hundreds of times from teenage kids in this country. It wasn't peer pressure. It wasn't peer pressure. Now, not to take away from peer pressure. I think peer pressure probably aids in availability to dope, particularly if your friends use it. I think peer pressure has something to do with experimental use. But the biggest majority of kids in this country who smoke pot, pop pills, take dope, sniff cocaine, they don't do it on an experimental basis. They're already past that. The majority of kids have been using on a regular basis, either day by day or every other day or 3 times a week. And so this deals with the majority of those kids. I don't think peer pressure has much to do with the biggest majority of the population of kids who smoke pot and pop pills in this country. I do believe it aids to availability. I do believe that it probably has something to do with experimental use. That wasn't the number one answer. The number one answer wasn't escape from reality. You know, I thought escape from reality. Who wants to escape from reality, especially this reality? You know, we've never had a generation of kids who've owned so much. They've never had so many cars or so many houses or so much money or so many things to do or such a chance to get a quality education. And who needs to escape from that reality? We've never lived so well as we live now. If anybody should have wanted to escape, my great-grandmother should have wanted to escape. She's the one who lived up in a little 2-room shack on the side of a hill and didn't have running water and didn't have McDonald's and didn't have TV. If anybody should want to escape from reality, they should have. That wasn't the number one answer. Pete gave me the number one answer. I said, Pete, why do you have to do it? and he gave me the number one answer. And this was it. Pete told me that the reason that he smoked pot and popped pills was not peer pressure, and it wasn't escape from reality. Pete told me the number one reason why he smoked pot and popped pills was because of boredom. And I said, boredom? What are you talking about, boredom? You don't have a right to be bored. If you want to know boredom, I'll tell you boredom. Well, good night. When I grew up, Mrs. Johnson in the second grade was my teacher, and she stood at the back porch of the school and she rang this handbell for recess. We called her the ding-a-ling lady. She rang the bell, and that was a sign of recess. We had outhouses in the back of the school. We didn't have playground equipment. When you wanted to do something at lunchtime or at recess, you got your friend and you took your belt off and you hooked the belt to the back loop of his pants, and he was the horse and you were the rider. And you ran around the school ground like that. Boredom, I didn't think Pete had a reason to be bored. I didn't give him valid credit for using the word, and I thought that he was unjust in trying to pack off the reason he smoked pot on boredom. And I told him that. He stuck by his answer. He told me school, boring, home, boring, church, boring, life, boring. Dope is the only thing that's not boring to me, and I like the feeling. I began to ask other teenage kids around the country, more so around the state of Tennessee, why do you do it? Why do you do it? Begin to talk to high school student bodies. Why do you do it? Why do you do it? Same answer, over and over and over again. Never peer pressure, never escape from reality. The same answer over and over again. Bored, bored. Life is boring, home is boring, church is boring, school is boring, English is boring. And this is the only thing that I do that's not boring to me. I like the feeling, it's not boring. If that was the number one answer that I got from teenage kids, I had to come up with an answer on why kids get bored. If that's the number one answer, why? Why do they get bored? If they use that as an excuse, how come? Why is it a valid excuse for them? At first, I didn't agree with the answer. I began to ask kids. I began to ask kids after kids after kids. The same answer came up. I began to do a little research in boredom. Why do people get bored? I think their answer is exactly right. I think their answer, I don't think it could be any more correct than it is. Let's look at boredom. Why do teenage kids get bored? If that's the number one answer, and that's why they have to smoke pot and pop pills, why do teenage kids get bored? I began to read, began to study a little bit, came up with a few ideas. This was one of the ideas that I got, not my own. I found this someplace else. I found this idea. It said that everybody who's born in this country and around the world has three parts to themselves. They're not just one part of a person, they're all three. And here was the three parts of the person. Spiritual, emotional, if I can spell it right, and physical. Made up the three parts of a human being. I said, I can buy that. That makes sense to me. Spiritual, emotional, and physical. So we begin to break down the attributes of each of these three persons. And if you're alive and you're watching, then you have these three parts to your own human being also. And we'll look at the attributes of those three things. First of all, let's look at physical attributes. And when I talk to high school student bodies and junior high school student bodies, we talk about the same thing right here, what I'm going to give to you right now. We talk about physical attributes. What are physical attributes? 5 things your physical body can do. Those are 5 physical attributes. You learned them in science class in the 2nd grade if you didn't flunk science class. And here they are. See, hear, smell, touch, and taste. Those are 5 basic attributes of your physical body. Those are 5 basic things that your physical body can do, and they're attributes of your physical body. Everything that your physical body can do, you can sum up in those 5 attributes. Let's look at emotional attributes. If I ask you, give me some emotional attributes, most of you folks would say love, joy, hate, sorrow, fear, anger, and we call those emotions. We call those emotions. But those aren't the bottom line attributes of your emotional being, even though we call those emotions. The bottom line attributes of your emotional being is thinking, reasoning, and remembering. Every emotion that you experience as a process of these attributes. You love somebody, that doesn't just happen. Love is an act of your emotional being, and it's a process of thinking, reasoning, and remembering. If you're not married, you're a fella and you're not married, and you see a pretty girl go by, you begin to think, she would look better with me than she would look better with him. You begin to reason, I can make her happier than he can make her happy. You begin to remember, boy, I remember the fragrance of the perfume that she had when she walked by. This process goes together to produce what we call the emotion of love. It's a process. It's the same thing with fear. I'm going to let you in on a secret. My wife would kill me if she knew I was going to tell you this. My wife has a deathly fear of vampires. Nothing else, not anybody else, just vampires. Now, she'd shoot me if she knew I told you this, but she has a deathly fear of vampires. I've said, honey, if you're going to be afraid of anything, why don't you be afraid of something that's real? Vampires aren't even real, fictitious. Why don't you be afraid of something that's real, you know, some hardened criminal? No, she's not afraid of a hardened criminal. She can shoot better than I can. And she embarrasses me sometimes, and that doesn't bother her at all. She could shoot a hardened criminal if he was trying to break in the house. It wouldn't bother her. Nothing else scares her. She doesn't have a fear of anything except vampires. This fear is a process of this same thing. I'll never forget, we came home, a couple of years ago, and some TV show came on one evening, and we caught the last half of it. It was called Salem's Lot. And we watched the last half for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks in my home. When my wife went down to this end of the house, I had to walk down there with her. When she came back to this end of the house, I had to walk back up here with her. For 2 weeks it was like that because of a stupid movie we saw on TV. The same process, thinking, reasoning, and remembering. I pulled a dirty trick on her one night. We were laying down in bed, ready to go to sleep, and she was getting ready to turn the light out, and I thought I'd be funny. And I rolled over, and she said, good night. I rolled over, and I went. She beat me to a bloody pulp. Very, very authoritative in her fear of vampires. But the fear is really what we call emotions, but it's not just an emotional or an attribute of this emotional being. It's a process of thinking. Thinking, I want to suck your blood. Reasoning. Oh, she remembers what we saw in Salem's Lot. Remembering all the horror stories that she heard about how vampires are going to bite her neck and all this junk. It all puts together this is the attribute of your emotional being that goes to make what you call emotions. Fear, love, hate, joy. There's a point in hand here, and all you ladies that are viewing this, if you're there, or your husband's there, or your boyfriend's there, this is a good time for you to take your elbow there and really give him one. Love is not something that just happens. You didn't walk down the street one day, and you're walking down the sidewalk of the city here, and all of a sudden the pit of love opened up and you fell in it. It's not like that. Love is an act of your will because your will is wrapped up in this emotional being. So therefore, to produce love, it's a process of thinking, reasoning, and remembering. It's an act of your will. It's a thing you want to do. So the reason that maybe you're not in love or you fell out of love is because you don't want to. You have to work on that. That's a thing that you have to do. A husband has to do that. He has to go through this same process of producing that emotion. It's not something that just, it's homeostasis. It just stays there. It's not like that. It's something that he has to work on through that attribute of thinking, reasoning, and remembering. Okay. This also houses your academics. Spelling, reading, writing, arithmetic, all that's right there. Now, let's talk about spiritual attributes for just a minute. I think conscience is a spiritual attribute. Incidentally, if you wanted to take Freud's id, ego, and superego, they'd fall about in the same line. Id, basic drives, your emotional, ego, reality, spiritual, your conscience, or sense of values. Spiritual attributes, a conscience. A conscience that's active produces guilt. I've heard a lot of people say today guilt is a bad thing. I don't think guilt is a bad thing. In fact, in studying psychopaths in police work, psychopath people don't have a conscience. It's been eliminated. They don't have guilt over what they did, no remorse. It's been eliminated. So conscience is a good thing because conscience produces guilt. Now, I think misplaced guilt is a bad thing, but guilt in general is not a bad thing because guilt shows that your conscience is working. That's a good spiritual attribute. There's another one I call God consciousness. We won't argue about that. There's another one that I call natural light. That's not a new kind of beer. That's ability, a deep sense, a natural ability to determine basic good and basic evil. And I think it's a spiritual attribute. And of course, sociologists would disagree with that. And they would say, no, all of those characteristics are learned. And I think that that's a spiritual attribute of basic right, basic wrong, basic good, basic evil. I think it's a spiritual attribute. Don't want to debate that right now. But anyway, each one of these three people in you have these attributes. Now, we're talking about boredom. We're talking about boredom. Where does boredom come from? If that's the #1 answer why teenage kids smoke pot, use dope. Life's boring, home's boring, church is boring, school's boring, English is boring. Why? Why? I think this is the answer. For the past 25, 30 years in this country, we've gone through a revolution. Or we've seen technological revolutions. We've seen revolutions of tremendous magnitude, but I don't think we've seen a revolution that has the power or the magnitude or the change that we've seen in the sexual revolution in this country. Now, let me show you something. For about 25 or 30 years, this is my personal opinion, I believe that in this country we have been programmed very slowly. We have been taught through media, through newspaper, through what we see, through things we hear. We've been taught nationally that this doesn't matter. Spiritual, don't worry about that. Don't worry about it. That's no big thing. Don't worry about that. That'll come. Don't worry about that. Emotional, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Right here is where it's at. Physical, hey, if it feels good, do it. We've been programmed that. Your kids have been programmed like that. Our kids have been programmed there's no rights and wrongs anymore. It's not right or wrong, it's situational. We call that situational ethics. No clear-cut rights and wrongs if it depends on the situation. It's not wrong today, and I'm going to get frank with you, not to try to be nasty, but I want to show you a point. It's not wrong today if you're a 14-year-old girl and you want to go to bed with somebody. That's not wrong. It's wrong if you get pregnant. That's what's wrong. We're told that it's your body. You do with it what you want to. If you want to seek eroticism, if you want to seek pleasure, if you want to seek self-fulfillment in the physical realm of your body, go ahead. It's your body. Do what you want to with it. No rights, no wrongs. Most second-grade kids know more about sex today than their mom and dad did when they got married. And some people say that's good. That's really good. I mean, after all, it's good that our kids aren't learning all this stuff in the bathroom like they did 25 years ago. We've brought all this stuff to the forefront, and now we're enlightened. I think it's amazing that in my county, we've become so enlightened that the herpes 2 and venereal disease rate of teenage girls and boys is at epidemic proportions in my county. I think it's amazing that we've become so enlightened in this country that in my county, the birth rate and abortion rate for high school and junior high school girls is epidemic rate. Never been that way in this country before, and never been that way in my county before. I think that's phenomenal. If that's really true, really, I'd almost rather go back to the bathroom and learn it in the bathroom as to pay the consequences that we're paying for it now. But I'm trying to show you that in this society, kids know more physical things than ever kids have ever known before. They know more than you ever knew when you were a little kid. Most of the emphasis today on television, most of the emphasis today on the radio, if you listen to some popular rock and roll songs, if you watch a lot of TV shows, you get the same attitude. Doesn't matter. Anything makes me high is okay. Anything makes me feel good's all right. Anything that makes my body erotic, nothing wrong with it. Anything that gives me a high is okay. And we are indoctrinating a nation and children who want to be total physical people, who want to be total sensual people, who want to feel something. A total feeling-oriented society. Hedonism, humanism, it's on every hand. Now, let me show you this. If we produce a nation of people who live here, we're going to produce two things. Number one, we're going to produce sensual people. Number two, you're going to produce bored people. Why? First of all, if you live here and this is all you know, and you have a teenage kid and this is all he knows and this is where he lives, 98% of life doesn't make him feel anything here. And so 98% of life he'll classify as boring. Church, boring. I mean, it's really boring. Why is it boring? It doesn't make me feel good here. Church is not supposed to make you feel good here. It's supposed to make you feel good there because that's where your spiritual attributes are. You grow up there, church will mean something to you. English, boring. Why is English boring? It doesn't make me high. English is not supposed to make you feel good there. English is supposed to make you feel good there because that's where your emotional attributes are and that's where your thinking, reasoning, and remembering is. And when you grow up there, believe it or not, English can mean something to you. Of course, unless your kid has the pleasure of attending an educational institution that says, we understand this problem. Kids aren't reading Keats anymore. They're not reading Shakespeare anymore. They're not reading Poe. They're not reading Byron. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? So now some high school administrations are saying, I know what we'll do. We'll come out with new high school literature and junior high school literature. We'll come out with new high school poetry and junior high school poetry. Instead of being the stuff that you read, it's not Keats, it's not Byron, it's not Poe, it's not Shakespeare. Instead of that, it's got dirty little four-letter words in it, and it's got sexual explicit scenes in it. And they're treating symptoms rather than root problems. The common answer that I've heard from some professors who advocate that, they say this, well, At least they read it. What's that tell you? That tells you that if a kid lives here, or an adult lives here, then nothing will please you unless it pleases you here. Number one, you'll be a very essential person. Number two, you'll be bored, because 98% of life doesn't make you feel anything right there. Nothing. And you'll have to mature here and here in order to be a total person. And other things in life you can experience and you can enjoy, and they'll make you a whole person. Here's number three. If you have a teenager who lives here, he's going to do dope. He's got to. He's going to drink too. He's got to. I'll never forget, we have a street in our town called Broad Street. And it's where all the teenagers hang out. Everybody goes down, parks their car, and you can't get through in the traffic. And back when I was working on the line, I used to go down, and you'd have to really be careful because you have to sneak up on these kids. And they became very crafty. They would take a beer bottle and take a different wrapping and put around it, a Coke wrapping. Or they would take a styrofoam cup and take the booze out of the Seagram 7 bottle or the whiskey bottle or the beer bottle, and they poured it in the styrofoam cup. And it looked like they were drinking Coke, so you had to sneak up on them, see? So I can remember a few occasions I was sneaking up on Broad Street, and I'll never forget one evening. I came up behind this girl, and she was about 14, and I stuck my nose right over in the cup and took a big sniff, and it must have been 150 proof bourbon. It was strong, almost knocked me out. And she got scared and thought I was going to take her in, and she was going to have to go to juvenile court. And I said, no, I'm not going to do all that. I'm going to pour all this out right now. And I won't ever catch you. I don't want to ever catch you drinking it again. And I went through my little routine. But I poured it out, but I said, I want you to give me some honest answers. Do you drink this stuff because you like the taste? She said, ooh, yuck. I'll never forget it. Ooh, yuck. Tremendous descriptive word. Ooh, yuck. I can't stand it. I said, well, do you drink it because you like the smell? Ooh, yuck. Same descriptive word. No. Why do you drink it? 14-year-old girl says to me, I have to get the feeling. I have to get the feeling. I thought that was tremendous. What's a girl telling me? If I live here, I have to do things that make me feel good here. So if you have a teenager in your home, and he's not a whole person here and here, or he's not even growing up here and here, if he lives here and that's all he knows, he's going to classify 98% of your whole lifestyle as boring. Number one, he'll be a essential person, he'll be bored, and three, he'll do dope because he has to get the feeling. That's where he lives. What's the saddest thing about that? Excuse me. I think the saddest thing about that is not just that 52% of the Chinese people were on some kind of narcotic when they lost their independence, and most historians say that's why they lost their independence, because nobody cared. I think it's a question of national security in this nation. If you get a bigger percentage of these people in this country who don't care about anything except getting high, I think you're walking on dangerous ground. Not just that. Not just that it poses a threat to other values and senses of values that we have in this country and some traditions that we have in this country. Not just that. Here's the saddest thing about that. If you have a teenage girl or boy and they live on a purely physical level, they'll never, ever enjoy the greatest and the most enjoyable things in life. They can't. I'll give you one. They'll never enjoy true love. They can't. Let's say you have a 14 or 15-year-old daughter, and she's dating Joe Cool, the captain of the football team, okay? Where does Joe Cool live? I don't know, because I don't know him. But let's just pretend that Joe Cool lives here. Let's say, just for this illustration, that Joe Cool lives on a physical level, and he goes out with your daughter, all right? Does Joe Cool, if he lives here, does Joe Cool want to be intimate and one with your daughter here, spiritually? No, he doesn't live there. Does he want to be intimate and one with your daughter emotionally? No, because he doesn't live there. If Joe Cool lives here, right here is where Joe Cool wants to be intimate and one with your daughter. The saddest thing about that, and I've asked high school kids and junior high school kids this all over Tennessee, when I spoke to high school student bodies, and I give the same lecture that I'm giving you, I say, tell me this, can Joe Cool really love you? No, comes the echo from 700, 800 kids in the student body. No, he can't. He can't. He can lust you. He can lie to you, but he can't love you. Why? Because he doesn't know how, number one, and number two, he's incapable if he wanted to. Why? Because he's only 1/3 of a person. And to love your daughter like somebody ought to love your daughter, or to love your son like somebody ought to love your son, they have to be a whole person, and you have to love with all three parts to be a total person, to really be in love. I've heard some parents say, well, things have changed so bad, and the system's all gone bad, and this whole society's so messed up that kids don't even care anything about that anymore. That's not true. That's not true. I think 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 and 16 and 17-year-old girls still have the same dream. They still have the same dream. It's the night of the homecoming football game. The stadium is packed with 100,000 kids, and this is what your daughter visualizes. She's sitting back about 3 rows back on the 50-yard line. It's almost halftime. The stadium is packed. The game is tied. One of those big nights. A lot of electricity in the air. She's sitting there. All of a sudden, a hush comes over 100,000 lips. 200,000 eyes shift down to this end of the stadium. And there, riding under the goalpost here, tall, dark, and handsome, riding a big white horse. People begin to whisper, who is he? Who is he? Nobody knows. He stops his horse and stands tall in the saddle, and his eyes meet 100,000 eyes. And then, your daughter stands 3 rows back on the 50-yard line. He sees her. Now he's at the 20, and now he's at the 30, and now he's at the 40, and now he's at the 50. He leans over in the saddle and sweeps her off her feet and places her on his lap, and they ride off into Never Never Land, happily ever after. Now, everybody still has that dream. Nothing wrong with that. All high school girls in this country still have that basic dream because they want somebody to love them. Nothing wrong with that. Fellas, if you really get honest with him, if you have a teenage boy and you really get honest with him and you can talk to him, and you're not going to be able to unless you've done these 3 things we talked about before, particularly quality time with your teenage kid. If you could really get in his heart and talk to him, he'll tell you that. I've had him by the scores tell me that. I want to know how to grow up and to be a responsible man and have a wife and a family and love her and take care of her like I should. Nothing wrong with that dream. Nothing wrong with that. But if in this society you grow up here and this is all you know, then that's all you want, and you'll never experience the real joy of really being in love with somebody, and neither will your children. Very sad. Very sad. Probably the saddest thing. We can produce people who are not total people in this country. It's very easy. It's very easy. As a mom and dad, if you have children, you don't even have to work at it. You can be a nominal mom and dad, and your kids can be totally influenced to grow up on a physical level in this country. It's not hard to do that anymore. It's not hard to see every moral standard that you've ever believed in or every moral standard that you grew up under crumble right before your very eyes. It's not a big thing today. No rights, no wrongs. It's not a hard thing for you to crank out a teenager who lives on this level. But you're going to have some tremendous problems in your home, number one. Number two, your kid's going to suffer in the long run because he's not going to be able to enjoy most of life, because most of life requires a maturity on all 3 of these levels. Now, I want to cover one thing, and then we'll be done. Parents say to me, okay, I buy into that. By the way, let me say this too. Do you know most of the problems that I've had and most of the people who disagreed with me have not been kids. I'll never forget, I was at a high school in Huntington, Tennessee, about 700 or 800 kids in the student body, and I told them exactly what I told you just now. And I got a standing ovation from 800 high school kids. I'm a very emotional person myself. Began to cry. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. They came down, stood all around, and I had kid after kid after kid after kid say, you know, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Nobody's ever told me that, but that's exactly where I live, and that's exactly how I am. And I don't want to be like that, but that's how I am. Time after time after time. The opposition that I get is usually from an adult level. But if you're an adult and you'll say, okay, I buy into that. I buy into that. Maybe things haven't been in my home like they ought to be. Maybe things haven't been altogether right. Maybe I've done some things wrong. Maybe most of society is really against me in raising my kid the way my mom and dad raised me. And I've got some problems. What can I do? First of all, if you have a kid that's between the ages of 0 and 12 and you just let him blend into the woodwork and you don't pay any attention to him, that's fine as long as he's not blowing up national monuments or burning down buildings. He blends into the woodwork and you don't pay attention. That's okay. But one of these days, you're not going to be able to do that anymore because about the time he turns 13 or 14, all of a sudden a tremendous change is going to come over your kid. And this little boy that was really nice, all of a sudden you have some kind of freaky monster living in your house. You've never seen this guy before. This is a strange thing that all of a sudden now inhabits my home. There's a fungus among us. He is right here. I know. Going to run into some problems. We can diagram it like that. From age 0 to about 12, we'll call the tender years. And from 13 to 19, we'll call the crisis years. And from 20 to death, we'll call maturity years. Now, granted, between 0 and 12, tremendously important time. Tremendously important time. That's going to form your kid's values in a sense. The crisis time is right here. When your kid turns 13 or 14, not only living in a society that says anything you want to do with your physical body is okay, anything you want to do that makes you erotic, anything you want to do that makes you high is okay. Go ahead and do it. It's your body, your business. Not only will he contend with that, but he's also got some tremendous drives and changes, and she does too, in her physical body right here. Some tremendous power that all of a sudden hits your kid. We can sum it all up, if you want to, in a thing called emotion. Not really the basic emotion that we talked about a minute ago. I'm talking about emotions as we term it. Love, joy, hate, fear, sorrow, all those things. Tremendous emotions that your kid's going to be attacked with right here, and some tremendous changes in their body. You're going to have trouble. You're going to run into problems. Let me ask you this. I have parents say to me all the time, I try to reason with my teenager. Can you reason with a teenager? Let me ask you this. Here's your reason. All right? That's really good. That is really good. I'm going to sit down and talk with my kid, and he'll understand, and he'll do what I want him to do, and he'll abide by the principles and the law of the land in our home. He'll do that because I reason with him, and he's a very reasonable person. Most parents who now have teenagers, and they've been teenagers for 2 or 3 years, say, no, there's no such thing as a reasonable teenager. I think I told you before, Mark Twain, in case you didn't tune in last time, Mark Twain said he had a philosophy about raising kids. He said if you have a kid, that's what you do. You take a big box, and you put a little hole in it, and you put your kid in there. And when your kid turns 16, you plug up the hole. Now, can you reason with a teenager? I don't think you can, and I'm going to show you why. Why? Because all your reason does not have the power that this emotion has. Doesn't even come close. All your reason in the world will not combat the power in that emotion. Now, it's the same thing with adults. Let me give you an example. Let's say that some of you men, let's say some of you, let's call your name Bill, okay? Let's say you're out there watching, and Bill, you've been working at a particular place of employment for about 10 or 15 years. And also at this place of employment, you've met a lady named Sally who works there too. And she's been there for the past 12 years, and over the past 12 years, or shorter time even, you've gotten to know each other very well. In fact, you've found that the last couple of years, you can talk to Sally, and she understands. Your wife don't understand. You go home and talk to your wife, she doesn't understand. Sally understands. In fact, you found that when a minute ago, spiritually, emotionally, and physically, you found that sometimes spiritually and sometimes emotionally, you can be closer to Sally than you can your wife. It's amazing. And it always seems like when your wife gives you a hard time and you go into work tomorrow, Sally always has a nice word to say. She always knows how to compliment you. She always tells you, you look nice when your wife doesn't ever remember it or doesn't ever tell you. Sally always comes across in the clutch. Now, you've got a chance to not just be intimate spiritually and emotionally with Sally, but you have a chance to be intimate physically with Sally. And your wife has a meeting out of town, excuse me, next Friday, and you're going to meet Sally at the Holiday Inn. Okay. Tomorrow morning, you get up, and regular routine in the morning, you sit down at the table, you have your coffee, you got a newspaper there, and your wife comes in and she sits down, and she says, Bill, I want to talk to you. I don't want you to say anything for 5 minutes, just let me talk. I understand that you work with a lady named Sally. And I understand that you've been working with her for quite some time. And I also understand that Friday, you're supposed to meet her at the Holiday Inn. Bill, you've been talking in your sleep. Now, Bill, you can go ahead and meet Sally. You can. You can. But I want you to know that when you do, I'm going to find out about it. And I want you to know that this house, these kids, that car, and 75% of your salary is going to be mine for the next 40 years. Do you meet Sally at the Holiday Inn Friday? No. Why? If I'd asked you on the street, if I'd have said, Bill, yesterday, if I'd have come up to you yesterday and said, Bill, don't worry about who I am, don't worry about who I am, I just want to ask you something. I know that you're going to meet Sally at the Holiday Inn Friday. Should you meet Sally at the Holiday Inn Friday? Oh, no, you'd say, I shouldn't do it. Why shouldn't you do it? I got kids. Well, why else shouldn't you do it? Well, I really do love my wife. Well, why else? Well, I could lose my job. Well, why else? Well, I could lose my family. I could lose my home. I could lose everything I worked for. Not only that, it's wrong. And I'd feel guilty about it. And my conscience is already working on me. No, if I asked you, Bill, you could give me 100 reasons why you shouldn't do it. But would you anyway, unless your wife didn't find out about it? Yeah, why? Because 100 reasons, Bill, does not combat the power of this emotion. All the reasons in the world will not combat the power of this emotion. What did keep you from going to the Holiday Inn and meeting Sally? This did. Fear. That's one thing as a parent that you have at your disposal that's as strong as this emotion that your teenager feels. It's the emotion of fear. It's the only thing at your disposal that you have that's as strong as the emotion that your teenager feels. And it's the only thing in your home that you can use effectively to keep correct behavior through these crisis years and keep your teenager doing what you want and what you know is right and what should be done in your home. The only thing you have at your disposal. Let me say one thing in closing about that. This is an illustration, and I don't want it to be crude, but I want you to understand. It's the best one I know of. My father, as I told you before, he didn't show his emotions a lot. He grew up from my grandfather believing that that was wrong. He didn't do that. But I was thinking about this same system right here of fear being the strongest avenue and strongest handle that you have to deal with your children. And I'll never forget, I was a junior in high school, and I had been bothering my father for months about a Yamaha. I want a Yamaha. Dad, please let me have a Yamaha. Please let me have a Yamaha. Let me buy a Yamaha. Dad, it's only $680. Dad, if you can come up with a 600, I can come up with 80. Please, Dad, let me have a Yamaha. Please, Dad, please. Every day we got home from school. Every day I hassled my father about that. Every day, let me have a Yamaha. My mom drove a school bus. We lived 9 or 10 miles out of town, and I always had to do chores at night, haul in the coal and feed cattle and do all that stuff. And I got it done this one night, and I had happened at lunchtime in school that day to pick up some pamphlets on Yamahas. And you know how they do it. They're glossy, and they've got beautiful motorcycles on there. And I brought that home. Well, my dad had to fix supper because my mom was driving a bus, and he didn't like to do that anyway. And he was in the kitchen fixing supper. And I took these pamphlets in, and I said, look, Dad, look, just look at this. Oh, look at this motorcycle, Dad. Oh, Dad, please let me have a Yamaha. Please, Dad, I want a Yamaha. Please let me have a Yamaha. My dad put down what he was doing. And he turned and he said, I've heard Yamaha till I'm sick of Yamaha. I've heard Yamaha till I can't stand Yamaha. Don't ever say the word Yamaha in this house again. Well, I was 17 years old. I was a junior in high school. I went back into the living room, and I did one of those teenage rebellious flops. You know how to do. You don't sit down in the couch, you flop down in the couch. And this is one of these real rebellious flops. I flopped back, I was hanging out over the end of the couch. My neck was bowed up on the back where you're supposed to be sitting upright. One of those good teenage rebellious flops. And I'm not trying to be crude here, but this is the best illustration I can give you. I had eaten something that day that didn't agree with me at all. And I had some problems with indigestion. And anyway, as a result of that, my father came around the corner, and he sniffed a couple times, and he said, why didn't you go in the bathroom? And I said, in my good rebellious flopping position, and being the smart 17-year-old that I was, I said, all I did was, and I said this word. I'll never forget it, never forget it. My father very calmly went over to the fireplace, and he picked up a fireplace poker. All of a sudden, 50% of the rebellion was gone out of my flop, and I was sitting somewhat upright. He turned with the fireplace poker, and he came over to the couch. By the time he got to the couch, there was no rebellion in my flop at all. I was fully upright in the couch. No rebellion in my countenance whatsoever. I'll never forget this. My father took the tip of the fireplace poker and he laid it on my nose, right here. Just touched it. And he sighted down that fireplace poker like a gun barrel. And he said, he didn't yell, by the way. Do you know that's the #1 thing teenagers hate? They hate you to yell at them. Because when you yell, it shows your weakness. That means you're not going to do what you said you were going to do, so you yell about it. He looked down the gun barrel and very quietly, almost in a whisper, he said, if you ever say that word in this house again, I'll wrap this around your neck. Child abuse! Child abuse! Ah, my father wouldn't wrap that around my neck. He wasn't strong enough to wrap that around. That was a piece of big iron bar for a fireplace. He couldn't have wrapped it around my neck, and my dad wouldn't have done it anyway. I mean, what father would have wrapped the fireplace poker around his son's neck? My dad wouldn't do that anyway. But I wasn't really sure. I never said the word in the house again. I'm sure my father wouldn't have wrapped a fireplace poker around my neck. But my father knew how to make use of this emotion because he knew that was the only thing at his disposal that was stronger than these emotions. Parents, if you want to keep your kids off dope, you can do the 3 things we talked about. If you want to know why, my personal opinion is why kids smoke pot and pop pills, it's because it's the easiest thing in the society to do. If you're raising a kid who lives purely on a physical level, he's going to be a sensual person, he's going to be a bored person. He don't have to smoke pot and pop pills because that's where he lives. The only thing that will change that is if you begin and decide in your own heart and in your own home that you're going to revamp some of the systems and some of the ways it's been going on in your home, restructure it, decide to build character and responsibility in children, and start taking some effective steps with your kids to have the kind of home and the kind of environment and to program your kid in the opposite direction of what society programs. I think we're in the future we're in for a lot of trouble. Thomas Jefferson said about 200 years ago, material abundance without character is the surest way to destruction. I believe that probably the old man was right. Thank you.